Coaching in Session,
your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
Welcome, Thomas Becker, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
Michael, great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks so much for coming on. We're going to be talking about your work, organizational psychologist, and you have done so much in your life and the wisdoms that you're going to be progressing with your books that are going to be coming out are going to be profound. And one of the things I love about what you do is that you do more than just pave the way. You set the tone. And it's important that in our world today, we understand the in and out of how the mind is working and how people are operating. And whether you are in business or just in an area of your life, we can look at how we can make it better. And so we're going to be talking about all of that today. But if you could, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help people?
Sure. So I was a college professor for 35 years. I came out of Ohio State University as an industrial organizational psychologist. I have a PhD in that field. And so I was teaching courses in management, human resources, organizational behavior, and subtopics within that field. I conducted research. That was 50% of my job. So publishing in academic journals, going to conferences, presenting. I was a consultant, a management consultant throughout that time. And those two activities of research and consulting kind of dovetailed because applying what I had learned in my scholarly work to what was going on in the field, and also allowing what I was seeing in real life to inform the scholarly work was kind of a marriage made in heaven from my point of view. Yeah, so, I mean, that's a quick summary of just teaching, service, consulting, and research in the area of organizational psychology was what I was all about for, like I said, 35 years now.
And all of this is leading up into the books that you're writing today. But before we go that far, I think it's important to understand, why did you choose this path of wanting to do the research and consulting businesses and being a professor?
Yeah, that's a profound question when you think about it, because, when I was graduating high school, I had no clue really what I was going to do. I was very interested in music. I'm an amateur trumpet player, so I thought I was going to do that. But of course, you find out you're a big fish in a small pond, and making a living at music full time is a challenge. So kind of my second love was psychology. I've always been interested in what makes people tick. Of course, when I was in my early 20s, mid 20s, that certainly included trying to understand myself was a big piece of it. So, I went to undergraduate, got a degree in psychology, and that qualifies you to do what I did right afterwards, which was wait on tables. Being an undergraduate psych major doesn't really, put you in the high-powered realms of business and organizations, but that really wasn't my motive going into it. So kind of a natural progression was thinking, okay, so I don't want to wait on tables my whole life. What's kind of the next reasonable step? So I went to graduate school and, like I mentioned, got my master's and PhD in organizational psychology from OSU. And I just really, really love the research and the teaching pieces of it, trying to discover new knowledge. One of my areas was employee commitment, motivation, leadership, group dynamics, and decision making. So, applying that and then communicating that knowledge to other people, working with undergraduate students, masters. I was in a business school, so I worked with a lot of MBAs. We had a doctoral program at several of the universities I worked with. And so working with doctoral students is extremely gratifying to see and help young people grow into their career paths too.
Yeah, speaking of young people, is one of the next questions I wanted to ask, because as a teacher or professor, you are nurturing the young minds or the next leaders of the generation to be able to be equipped to handle what is going on or what they would like to do. Because I went to college also, I got a master's in education. I was a teacher for some time. And if I didn't have the professors that I've had, and I'm sure there's many other wonderful professors, but they took me from a fledgling, someone who thought they knew everything, to
Yeah.
someone who at least knew something.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny how you go into college, and it's very different than high school, of course, and you know it.
No
It's
question.
it's it's a lot more freedom. Where when we're young, we have to raise our hand to go to the restrooms and things along those lines, and you have
Right.
to stand in line if you want to like go in the
Yeah.
hallway.
Yeah.
And then the first day of college comes, and you're just raising your hand, professor, can I go to the restroom? And they're like,
Yeah.
you don't have to raise your hand if you want to go to the
Autonomy is
bathroom.
dropped in your lap, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so college is a big part of my life, and I believe college is an essential part of maturing. However, our world today is leaning more toward an entrepreneurial mind of we can just start a business. We don't necessarily need college. And there's pros and cons of going to college. I believe if you want to be a lawyer, you should go to college. If you want to be a doctor, you should go to college. If you need to be a teacher, you go to college, right? There's going to be certain professions that you need a college degree or some type of certifications to prove that you should be in that field. Now, we live in a world where people can be social media stars. They can just start podcasts, and they don't necessarily need to have a wide breadth of education. And
That's
so
true.
one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, do you see this being a pro for the future generation, where they might be looking at education as an option versus something that is going to help lift them up to the next career point?
Yeah, I think when I think about that question, I consider both the short term and kind of the long term implications. So you're right. I mean, short term, an entrepreneur, for example, doesn't need a PhD, doesn't need maybe not even need a college degree at all. You can give many examples, or at least some examples, as with Bill Gates dropping out of Harvard, and Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, in particular, not having college degrees. So it is possible. There's no question about that. But I think if you think a little more broadly, not about specific cases, but what in general is in a person's best interest if they're trying to have a satisfying career. For instance, the Wall Street Journal every year does survey a questionnaire on how much money people make over the course of a lifetime. And of course, money is only one of many, indicators of career success. But with each advance in education, there's a clear and a long-term and long-standing relationship between how much education people have and how far they go in their career and how much money they make. And that relationship is held until today. So again, I'm not trying to say money's everything, but in terms of career progress, it is relevant. Also, I think there's two other really important longer term implications. One is, as you grow a little bit older, you think of yourself not only in terms as an employee or a founder of an organization, but as a citizen. And to be a well-rounded citizen, you have to have education. And the benefit of college is it gives you at least a basic understanding of all the major fields. So you'll take a course in, of course, math and physics, chemistry, biology, all the sciences. You'll probably take a course. Most colleges require you to take a course in the social sciences, psychology, sociology, archaeology, and 1,000 other options that people can take throughout their college career. And this effect is, broadening in terms of people's ability to look at their lives and the lives of others and consider their context and their culture, and think about it in a way that's much broader than just, very narrowly, okay, what can I do to maximize my net worth, or, gain followers or things of that nature. Again, I'm not knocking those, but, you really do think more broadly. The other thing is, I think that's really critical is when you have an education, in these days, a higher education, it forces you to think critically. It forces you to think critically about your own perspective. It gives you the ability to reason in such a way that hopefully, if you're paying attention, it's not just about the particular content of a course that can be relevant, but it's not just that. It's being able to take out an idea, put it on the table, and look at it from multiple directions. It doesn't eliminate bias, but it gives you a way to think a little more objectively about things. In a polarized world like we live in, I think that is pretty invaluable. So that's my thoughts on education and the role it might play in many people's lives.
I agree. I believe education is paramount into someone's personal development. We have this mindset, especially teenagers, when they are in high school, they say, okay, I can't wait to be done with school so I can just do whatever I want. It's very similar to, I think, a kid thinking about, I can't wait to be an adult so I can eat cookies and ice cream all day.
Yeah.
You finally make it to adulthood and you realize that's not a good idea. And so when we are seeking education, when we are done with college or we're done with schooling, some people, they get mentors, some people, they will watch YouTube, podcasts, get life coaches, things along those lines to try to further themselves. And all of these are viable options for a person. But the key point is that you're doing something to further yourself, to better yourself. And there's a saying, if you're not learning, you're dying.
Yeah.
Very similar to, like, if you're not growing, you're shrinking.
Sure.
Times are going to be changing so rapidly with, the vast spread of technology, with AI coming in. There's just so many options for a person today. But yet, stand true tale of education is something that someone can't take from you. And I believe that's maybe one of the most important things is if you are educated, then you can have a sense of free will. You can have a sense of understanding your potential. You have a sense of being maybe more organized, because to be able to, especially yourself, go ahead and get a PhD, that requires an immense amount of organization and then focus. Our world today, we have TikTok brains. I'm not sure if you ever heard of that saying.
Right.
TikTok brains, right?
Yeah,
it's like 3.42 seconds or something along those lines.
It's crazy,
that's their attention span.
Yeah.
And we can, of course, adjust that. We can change that. But there's a good majority of people who are just kind of stuck in the ways. And libraries today have become almost obsolete because of technology, where we have everything at our fingertips. If we need something, we can ask Google, or we can ask ChatGPT, or we can ask Gemini, or whoever. We can ask some AI program or something, and we can hopefully get an answer for what we're looking for. And though that is great, sometimes they are only just operating in the now versus understanding what history is. And there's a saying also, like, if you fail to understand and be educated about history, then you're doomed to repeat it. And so we live in this cycle of trying to progress, but then we might hit a roadblock. There could be some bits of failure, and we can look at the aspect of businesses succeeding and failing, and then the aspect of people succeeding and failing. I say there's a 50-50 chance of you winning in life. Either you do or you don't. And people, they think more in the line of, well, the top 1% or the top 5%, they look at the competition versus, what is allotted for them. Mm-hmm. So, getting into the psychology part of the mind, what makes a person a go-getter? What makes a person challenge the status quo? What makes a person be hungry for something more in their life?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to acknowledge your last point and agree with the fact that education today is actually it's easier to learn today to fit it into your schedule than ever before. Getting an education, including a college degree, but other things as well, that can be done online. Most courses, University of South Florida, where I taught the latter part of my career, had online courses. It had face-to-face classes. It had hybrid variations. And so finding something that works for you in your life is easier than ever. So I concur fully that continues to be really valuable. Now, to your question about the psychology of kind of the achieving personality, if I can put it that way. I think like most other aspects of human beings, both nature and nurture play a critical role. There was a guy, David McClellan, that years ago did research, spent most of his career looking at need for affiliation, need for achievement, and need for power as individual differences among people. So people vary on those factors. And I think what you're asking about mostly is need for achievement. So, yes, it seems that some people are kind of born with a tendency to want to achieve more so than others. But primarily, that's something that's developed through their environment, their upbringing, and of course, the choices that they make along the way. I remember one study, Michael, this is kind of fascinating to me, that when you take somebody who's got a really high need for achievement, a lot of times, if you give them some sort of task where they can work towards a goal, they'll pick a level of goal that is, they've got roughly 50% chance of achieving it. So they don't want a goal that's like outrageously beyond their current capability, and they don't want something easy. So I remember this one study used a task where they were trying to throw, what do you call those? Almost like hacky sack bags into a circle, and they got to choose how far away they stood from the circle to toss, the object into it. And those people with higher need for achievement stood at a distance where their chances of success were about 50%. And so, a lot of follow-up studies have discovered the same thing. And I think that the reason I think that's kind of an important point is in the popular press, and it's true with some individuals. It happens to be the case, but the idea that you hear most often is you've got to take huge risks in order to succeed. And of course, the downside to that is when you take huge risks, you've also increasing the probability of not achieving a particular goal. So I'm not suggesting that people who are the high need for achievers don't set challenging goals, but they do incrementally set goals that are within their reach given their current competency level. And I think that's kind of an important point to keep in mind as we set, kind of maybe a long-term vision, our annual goals. Many people break that down to, weekly or daily goals. What do I want to do today that's tied to my purpose that I've defined for myself? So, yeah, I think most of it, I believe, is based on environment and upbringing. It helps a lot to have some role models along the way, without question. That might be your parents, it might be a teacher, it might be, if you're interested in sports or science or any particular field, it might be somebody who's just really great in that area you're interested in. So having mentors and having role models that make sense for a given goal, I think is really essential.
Right. And the environment can also be an environment you set for yourself by just reading books, for example.
Yes.
I remember it's in 2016 for me, had a life-changing moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a choice to make. I could stay or I could go, right? I could stay in Connecticut where I was teaching and I can do that for the rest of my life, or I could do something different, right? And the different, I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So it was a leap of faith for me to say, hey, like I'm doing this and I don't know what I'm going to do next.
Yeah.
But during that time between 2016 and 2018, I can't tell you how many books I read. Hundreds of books. I read hundreds of books. And it was because I was looking for something.
Yes.
And I knew that I had to keep on reading in order to not only better myself, but to find what I was looking for. And I know everyone is trying to rush to get to where they want to be in life, right? They see the goal and they just want the goal. They don't want the journey. They don't want the long nights. They don't want the hard moments. And so when I was reading, and I was not a fan of English growing up or writing or reading growing up. Like if you ask any of my elementary teachers, they would say that he's going to hate reading for the rest of his life. And I just found a love in learning, a love in reading. And I remember I would start reading and I was like, okay, I'm reading at a moderate pace. And as I started to get more depth in reading, I just love the smell of the pages even more, and turning the pages and just hearing the crispness of it. And I just fell in love with reading. And so it was easy for me where I just put it in my schedule. I said, this is mandatory for me. Very similar to how someone might say being on their phone is mandatory, or watching Breaking Bad or The Office is mandatory for them. where for me, reading was mandatory. I like scheduled it in my day, right before bed. I said, I'm going to read until I get tired and fall asleep.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was 30 minutes, 40 minutes, because I had just had a rough day. And sometimes I could read for hours on end. And I would have never thought that I would be a reader in my elementary days. But then here I am, hungry for knowledge and hungry for wisdom. And I just started to think that even though I wanted to learn all of these things because I wanted to start a business and I wanted to do all these wonderful things in my life, I just didn't know how. Of course, I got mentors and coaches down the way, but during the inception of me wanting to change, I was like, I need information. And so I started to read more books. I didn't go on my phone and started to look for the answers. I did the work. And it was something powerful about that because I was able to go through the shelves of the library and say, okay, let me check out this author. And I found authors that I have loved that I would consider my mentor today. And
Exactly
I
right.
started to ask myself, what drives a person to want to write a book? Because I understand the power of it, where it can change someone's life. Like a reader can read and say, wow, my life has changed.
Mhm.
But then again, there's going to be so many books that sit on the shelf and never get touched.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
true.
to fall into this world of being an author and to write down the wisdoms that you have gained and learned throughout life, what was your journey to this point in your life is saying, I want to write things down for people to read and to understand and to be educated upon?
You know what? I think that ties very beautifully to the point we were just discussing a few minutes ago about achievement and what drives people towards that end. And I think, that period you were discussing where you were reading and reading and reading and searching, and you weren't sure exactly where it was going to take you, but you just wanted knowledge because you knew you needed it to go wherever it was going to be. I think that central motivation to find a purpose is like something that
Mm,
follows most of us our whole life. So in my case, when I retired, I knew I wasn't going to sit around watching TV or, gardening. Not that there's anything wrong with
I love
that.
gardening.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have things that you do that are fun or for leisure, or, you can turn gardening into a full-time career if that's your inclination.
Right. Mhm.
But my point is that you need to have, I believe, at least speaking for myself, I needed to have a continued purpose. And so for so many years, it was research and teaching and providing service to the university and the community and doing consulting. And when I retired, I stepped away from most of that. And so I started thinking about, okay, so what's next? And I had this idea. I can't tell you where it came from, but given my age and stage in life, I just had this strong drive to want to finish strong, whatever that meant. I mean, I had that kind of phrase in my mind. I don't want to get to the end of my life and feel like, okay, I limped to the finish line, or, I was really done 20 years ago and I was just kind of hanging out for the rest of the time. I'll just tell you, a personal story here I think was really a driver. My dad had a career. He's a white collar employee at McDonnell Douglas, who I don't know if you remember that organization. Boeing bought them. They used to design fighter planes, big military contractor. So he worked for them for 30 years. And, I mean, it's a sad story, but every day, Michael, he would walk out the door. And the last thing I'd hear him say before he left, this is not made up. This isn't for any particular, effect, except just tell you exactly what he said was, another day in hell. And I just thought, wow, that is
Mm,
a sad way to view your life. You know what I mean? And those were his exact words. And I must have heard that 1,000 times. And, I think from his point of view, it was a sacrifice he was doing for his family. I have to do this to provide and all that. But I remember even as a kid thinking, please don't do that for me. Do something. Of course, you have to survive, and handle the basics, but, you know, almost everybody's much more capable than another day in hell. So, yeah, I think that set me on the path of wanting to have a fulfilling career. And when I retired, wanting to continue that to finish strong. And when I started thinking about, okay, well, what does that really mean? I mean, that's a very abstract thing to say finish strong. What it meant to me was find something that I can do for work that is very challenging, hopefully will be helpful to other people. And that's where I came up with the book and the idea for the book, Beyond the Diversity Wars. Also, obviously, relationships. I'm married. I've been married for 30 years. I got a kid that's getting married. My youngest son's getting married in October. So, work and relationships, and then leisure. I continue to play the trumpet, like I mentioned. So, yeah, that's really where that's how I came to the book ideas. Yeah, that's something I've always kind of had in the back of my mind as a professor. I was so busy with other things, giving it the full attention that's required to really have kind of a hyper commitment towards a goal like that was much more difficult. So that's how I came to the decision to write the book.
Yeah, we get so busy in life. I
Yeah.
remember when I was 18 and I started my career as intern at Sikorsky. They built the Black Hawk helicopter for the Army. And I worked in finance department and accounting department. This is what I thought I was going to do with my life because I was really good at numbers and really good at math. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I remember my second year of going in, I was like looking at the cement, and you know how they have lines in the cement to help from cracking and things like that. So I'm just like seeing it kind of like, like pass by, kind of like a fan blade. And I'm just like, whoa, like this is my life. And I just felt the dread immediately. And I remember, using my key card to go in, and I was like, I can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
And so that was a point in my life where I was going to school for finance and accounting. And then I said, you know what, I'm going to switch my major to teaching because it was one of those ideas that I had, and I had it for quite a long time, probably like when I was in sixth grade. But then also when I was in sixth grade, I was in advanced algebra, and all the teachers and all the people around me were saying I'm so good at math and that I should pursue a career in math. And so I was like, well, I have a passion and I have a skill, and everyone's touting my skill and saying, hey, I'm so wonderful at this. This is what I should be doing. And it wasn't until I started to think for myself, saying, well, what do I want? What do I want my legacy to be? And even as I was teaching, I started to see teachers retire. And I said, okay, what did they create? What did they do with their life? And they spent 30, 40 years in the profession. And I'm not saying that they wasted their life, but I just said I wanted something more. And I know there's people who get into this realm of business and being entrepreneurs where they want to create these big companies and they want to do something more, where they do sacrifice themselves for their family, perhaps. And maybe they find themselves down the road a little bit and it looks a little bit different than how they thought. Maybe now they're divorced. Maybe now their kids want nothing to do with them. And they forgoed all that time, like taking some time to understand what they wanted to do and truly say, this is what I want to be left with, or like, this is what I want the world to remember me for.
Yeah.
And one of the last questions I want to ask you, because I think this is important for people to understand, is that we are hungry for purpose in life. And sometimes people can get that purpose mixed up very quickly when it comes to profit, where they are trying to make a buck, they're trying to make a living, and there's some correlation to, happiness and money. They say what, $75,000, $79,000 around that point.
That's right.
Where they say any more money is not going to make you any more happier. But then again, it depends on your lifestyle, what you're looking for. And so we look at all of these numbers, we look at the statistics, we look at the facts, we look at the stories, we talk to mentors, and they have different sayings to what a person should be doing or feeling. And so, as a professor and working with so many students, and as a husband for 30 years and a father, you've been around the block sometime. And so you have the knowledge, you have the experience where you can instill something onto someone and saying, hey, like, I understand you might be doing this, but this is what is going to matter at the end of the day. And I think of this interview where this guy, highly successful, he sold the company, for some millions of dollars. And he was asked the question of what is success? And it wasn't his money. It wasn't his businesses that he created. He said, success is that your kids want to come home and see you. And I
Yeah,
said, wow. I
that's a
was
good
like,
one.
that's powerful.
Yeah.
And so we have all of this knowledge that, or experiences or things that the world is trying to give a society, where it's like, hey, you need this, you need to do that. But then again, at the end of the day, maybe you just want your kids to come home, or maybe
Yeah.
you want to be able to go on vacation with your wife or something along those
Right,
lines. It
right.
could be so simple, but we forgo that for
Mm.
an exterior motive or materialistic goods. What is your say on the mind or the mindset of people who might be going for one thing and it changes later on in life?
Yeah. Yeah, well, you yourself are a good example of that because when you felt that, I don't know if you would call it quiet desperation or as you put it, the
Oh, it was.
dread, the dread for that was a great image of the fan and those cracks in the sidewalk. And the beauty is you listened to that. And unfortunately, like my dad, he didn't listen to that. He just kept watching the fan go round and round. So, direct answer to your question about getting at what's important in life, I think it's helpful for all of us, myself included, to try to peel back the layers of our own onion to try to get at what that purpose really is. And I think to get there, asking yourself why 3 or 4 times when you give your initial answer is very helpful. So you say, what's your purpose in life? Well, I want to build a $30 million business by the time I'm, 28, say some hard driving young person. Okay. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to make that money by the time you're 28? It depends on the person, of course, but maybe somebody says, well, I think that'll give me the respect that I'm looking for, or that'll allow me to take care of the people I care about, or that'll be a stepping stone to an even greater challenge. There's a number of obviously possible answers to that question, but the way that a person answers that tells them something about themselves. It takes them one more step beyond, okay. And so let's say that the individual says, well, I really want the respect of other people. And now if I show them I can do that, that'll get me there. Just push it one more step further. So why are you so interested about getting the respect or approval of other people? And there might be a great reason for that. It doesn't necessarily mean you're psychologically damaged or that you care too much, but it could mean that you're putting so much credence on what other people expect of you, or you're seeking their approval, that you're trying to manage their impressions through doing things like spending, 120 hours a week building up a $30 million business. And again, motivation is complicated, but that's just one. I'm giving you that example because I think peeling back those layers is really critical for an individual to find something about what is their core purpose. For me, when I do that, it's not too complicated. And I think I've got a general formula that's probably true of, I don't know, 90% of people. You can tell me if it's true for you, Michael. When I ask myself that question, it gets down to I want to do good work that's meaningful. I want to have a great family wife. I want to be a good husband to my wife, Luann. I want to be a great dad to my son, Charlie. And I want to have some fun in life too. So it really boils down for me to be work, family, and leisure. It's not one thing, it's kind of balancing those things. And for a lot of years when I was working to get tenured as a college professor, I was much more focused on work because, you kind of have to be if you want to hold on to your job. And plus, I loved it. And thankfully, my wife was understanding about that because, when one person is so focused, I probably wasn't doing as much as I could have or should have at home. So, I think that balance can change over time as your values change or your circumstances. But it really is important to get there and to, try to peel back the layers of self awareness. Um, You've mentioned some great quotes. Aristotle, I think it was, who said, "Know thyself." That is so essential. It's not just an option or something you do for fun. If you're really trying to understand and manage your life, that's a critical first step. So, yeah, I'd have to say that's a major goal and kind of my words of wisdom for the day.
Yeah, I like the recent. It's not recent, but it's one of my more recent quotes of success, and it's having everything and needing nothing.
Hmm.
And so, going
That's
along
great.
with, that, the 90% of what people want, I would say I fall in line with that 90 because, I just want to be with my wife and my kids at the end
Yeah.
of the day when everything is said and done, where maybe we are just sitting down and we're just talking about nothing, or maybe we're on vacation, right?
Right.
And it's those simple pleasures in life that I found to pay more attention to
Hmm.
because life moves very quickly.
It does.
And if you blink for too long, you're going to miss a lot of it. And
Agreed.
there's going to be many opportunities that you're going to miss if not you yourself, but
I
in
understand.
general,
Yeah.
they're going to miss if they don't take some level of action. And you hit it spot on. Motivation has many different layers. And so what motivates a person to be that top 1% is very different than someone who's just barely trying to scrape the rent money. So maybe you fall on the bottom barrel. And it's not to say that you can't change, but do you want to change? What do you want the end result to be? And I just loved our conversation because it talked about so many aspects of the mind. It talked about so many aspects of life where people can be on different paths or progressing in different journeys of their life, but it doesn't mean that they're stuck in those journeys. Very similar to
That's right.
how I've had many different career path changes in my life. There was always a choice that I had to make. And it was either do I want to do it or do I not want to do it? And I encourage people to want to make the changes in their life. And it's important to understand their mind and to understand, what they are meant to do with themselves. And so as we begin to wrap up, Thomas, I would love to get some final words from you. Of course, you can talk about anything you want. You could talk about things that we didn't talk about. You can do a reflection of what we have spoken about. Basically something to leave the audience with. And then, of course, can you please tell people how they can find you, reach out, and then, of course, get your works when they're out?
I think, though, what I'd like to kind of leave your audience with, since they're obviously very interested in personal growth, physical, mental, interpersonal, and so on, is the idea that in today's polarized world where it seems like the extreme voices on either side of the political continuum or on particular social topics, um, those extreme perspectives really kind of grate not only at each other but for the rest of us too. So one question I've wrestled with in the book is, well, what do you do to try to move forward in such a polarized state, whether that's in your personal life or in your work, your work life? And the two ideas that I've been trying to wrestle with and communicate to people are, first of all, a detente mindset, and second, kind of whole person appreciation. So a detente mindset, in my view, is where you are not interested in changing the other person so that they, trying to force them or reason them into seeing things your way. And you're certainly not going to change your views just to please them. But you want to keep the conversation going. And kind of my model for this was during Jimmy Carter's administration. We could debate how great of a president he was or was not. But one thing he did that was great is he brought the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, and Menachem Begin from Israel together in the woods of Maryland for this Camp David Accords. And it was all about this notion of détente. These two guys hated each other personally, and their countries had been at war for years, and both sides were losing people. Obviously, their economy was going to hell and so on. So this détente mindset is not, hey, we're going to love each other and go for beers every Friday, but what mutual goals might we have, and how can we at least peacefully coexist? Where disagreement doesn't mean automatically you're my enemy. So that, I think that way of looking at things, especially when you're talking with somebody who's very different from yourself, is essential skill for today's leaders. The other thing is whole person appreciation, where, when you start putting people into categories and pigeonholing them into whether it's social identities or, little boxes that represent whatever categories you use in your brain to, kind of group people. When you do that, you lose a part of the person. So social identities can be and are really powerful for many people. To say that, we should ignore whether somebody is, let's just say, a member of a tribal community or an African American or a woman or whatever, that's irrelevant. That misses so much of our history and what we need to face in the world that, it doesn't make sense. Those categories serve a purpose. But if you're trying to have a relationship with somebody, thinking more on a continuum rather than these little boxes is so helpful. If you and I were getting to know each other over the next week, Michael, I'd probably learn some of the idiosyncrasies about you. I know that you've been a great reader, so that's something kind of specific to you that I've learned. I know that you've been in the education field and you've started your own businesses now, so I know that. But I learned all the little, quirks about the way you think or the way you act or things that have happened to you. So that's one end of this continuum, the things that are very unique to you. But on the other end of the kind of the identity continuum is your shared humanity with all other human beings. So rather than pigeonholing people into these categories, thinking about, okay, if I really want to understand or get to know somebody, it's on this continuum from the unique aspects of who they are. Somewhere in the middle is those social identity markers. And on the other end is the fact that we just both are human beings and we've got some common needs too. Allows you to have a relationship and work with people and live with people in a way that's not possible otherwise. So that's my final words I would leave with your audience is try to work on developing that mindset of detente where somebody's disagreeing with you, they're not your enemy, you don't have to change them, you don't have to change for them. But if you're going to work with them or have them in your life, like maybe they're an in-law or something like that, or the turkey, there's ways to do that rather than just making them your enemy or hurling stones at them. So yeah, I'd leave you with that message. In terms of getting a hold of me, I'm very easily available on LinkedIn. You just search for Thomas E. Becker. There's a few other Tom Beckers, but if you search for Thomas E. Becker, it'll take you right to my page. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I've posted newsletters there, lots of other posts. You can message me and so on. I'm working with the company to finish my personal website. That'll be done within about a week. That's going to be thomasebecker.com. So just my name, thomasebecker.com, will take you to that site. And would love to stay in touch with you, Michael, and any of your listeners who might be interested in continuing the conversation.
Perfect. And I'm going to make it easy for everyone. All the links are right down below. So you can check him out on LinkedIn if you have it, or you can always go to his website and you can see what he's up to next, because in life, we are going to be going down so many paths, as I was saying. And it's important to listen to where you are right now and where you want to be. You had a great point. Ask yourself why 4 times, 7 times, it doesn't matter. Just ask yourself why. And then that right there is going to begin to help you organize your life a little bit more. And I encourage people to reach out to Thomas to keep on with the conversation. I can't tell you how many professors I would just speak with after class, and even to this day, because they have been a part of my life and they help me see things that I couldn't see before, because we all have blind spots and we all can sometimes get our tunnel vision going. But it's important to open our horizons a little bit more, to see other points of view, and to not just remain in a stagnant point of life. Life has so much more to offer you. We just have to open up, pay attention. So I do want to thank you, Thomas, for coming on, spending some time talking about your work and everything that you have done and you will be doing in your life.
Michael, thanks a million. It was really a joy talking with you.